Minecraft is a sandbox game that takes place in an infinite world full of variety, but in this video I'm going to be surviving in a different kind of sandbox. Over the next 100 days, I'll be surviving in this desert-only world. Without access to basic resources like trees, I'll need to think outside the box in order to progress. Along the way, I'll be attempting to max out my gear, defeat the dragon, kill the wither, build a massive base, and restore life to this desolate land. Upon loading into the world, I spawned right into a village.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me.
As you can imagine, this was a very lucky start, because playing in a desert-only world meant that I couldn't really punch a tree to begin my journey. So I punched the closest thing to a tree that I could find and began looting the village. The second house had a crafting table in it, and this was essentially the key to my survival. You see, villages may have a bunch of hay that's free for the taking, but without a crafting table or the means to craft one, you can't turn it into food. Lucky for me, I now had one, and was no longer just a man stranded in the desert. I was a man stranded in the desert with bread. I took note of some of the surrounding structures and then went for a swim. Basically, I just wanted to show that these big bodies of water that may look like oceans aren't actual oceans. There's no kelp, no fish, no squids, and that's because the entire overworld is classified as a desert biome. Returning to the surface, I collected some more hay. Grabbed my crafting table, some sugarcane, more hay, and noticed this funny looking building at the back of the village that looked like 3 houses squished together. The next thing on my agenda was to sacrifice the iron golem. It was a slow process since all I was equipped with was my stubby fist, but it was an important step because I could use the iron to craft my first pickaxe. From there, I looted a couple more chests around the village, ate some bread, and set off in hopes of finding a cave. Now, the main thing that I needed a cave for was iron, but I also gathered some stone, and some coal along the way. The main purpose of this trip was to get enough iron to solve my wood problem, and once I had the 4 I needed, I went back up to the surface, only to be met by a skeleton. Having nothing but a pickaxe, I wasn't about to risk this world to fight it, so I ran away, returning to the surface, and then the lava pool next to the village where I could execute my plan.
So my goal is to go to the nether and get wood there. Of course, that's dangerous and it could potentially backfire quite badly, but that's the main way that we're gonna progress here.
And so I crafted up the flint and steel, went to sleep to prevent mob spawns, made the bucket, and then proceeded to create the portal. It's not the most efficient portal you're going to see, but I don't make them like this very often, and I definitely didn't want to mess it up. Once it was finished, I cleaned up a bit, grabbed my bed, crafted a stone axe, picked up the crafting stations, and went through the portal. On the other side, I was greeted by the exact biome that I wanted to see. Being in a warped forest, I was safe to collect as much wood as I needed. The only thing that I had to avoid was looking at an enderman, and not getting burned by the lava fall that just surrounded my portal. I continued collecting wood for the next couple minutes, stopping once I had a full stack, and went back to the overworld, where I used my last iron ingot to make a shield. And I actually had a pretty decent setup at this point. Having my new shield gave me the confidence to return to the cave, this time with the intention of going deeper. My new goal being to get a full set of iron armor. Wanting to avoid fighting any mobs, I crafted up some doors to try something different. Underwater mining. Ignoring everything I knew about physics, I used the doors to breathe underwater, allowing me to mine a vein of iron. And some coal, which happened to lead to the deeper part of the cave I saw earlier. I used this secret passage to slip past the mobs unnoticed and get the iron, which I began smelting up. With another piece of iron collected, I crafted some pants and a chest plate, mined another 2 veins, and got some gold. With the iron, I completed my set of armor and used the leftovers to make a second pickaxe. No longer exposed, I decided that there wasn't a point in leaving this cave until I was rich. Sure, I could go to the surface and work on a starter base or something, but the most risky part of the early game was going to be getting my first diamonds. And it just made sense in my head to get the risky stuff out of the way first. So I focused on collecting as much coal and iron as I could while descending through the cave. Lapis was also going to be an important resource during this playthrough, because I wanted to challenge myself to get gear through enchanting instead of trading with villagers. Trading is definitely the much easier method of the two, but I just needed a change of pace during this video. The entirety of day 2 was spent in the mines, and I used this time to collect as much iron and gold that I could, while hunting for diamonds. I got into my first real fight that day, putting the shield to good use. Across a lava lake, I found another flooded part of the cave, and again used my door trick to explore it. It was here where I found my first diamonds, getting 3 from the first batch and 1 from the second. But 4 diamonds wasn't going to cut it. I needed at least 5 for a pickaxe and enchanting table. So I continued my exploration until I eventually stumbled into some more. There turned out to be 3 here, and a lot more lapis in the area. In another flooded part of the cave, there were 3 more diamonds, one of which flew off the cliff and I was too lazy to chase it. But worry not, there were more shiny blue rocks to find, and with my total now at 11, I decided to continue the search. Nearing the surface, I found more coal, and just as the sun was beginning to rise, I too would rise out of the ocean, not too far from my starter village. I decided to swim out to the ruined portal I saw, stealing the gold block from the top and some random loot from the chest, like this piece of obsidian, fortune 3 gold pick, and a golden apple. Scouting out the next village, I noticed that it had an animal pen. This would be very important if it had cows in it, as that would give me a source of leather for all the bookshelves I was going to need for the enchanting table. Unfortunately, the pen belonged to a horse, and the chests in the village gave me nothing more than some extra bread. So I continued on to the next one, where I found a blast furnace, and a library, which meant that I could skip the leather and go straight to the books. Was it ethical? No. But was it more ethical than breeding cows just to kill them for leather? I'd like to think so. Crafting up a questionable stone hoe, I began stealing the village's food supply, as I figured the best way to cripple a community was to take out their source of knowledge and their source of sustenance. Leaving another village in shambles, I continued my journey, finding a new one. My plan was to either find a village with a pair of cows in the animal pen, or find another library. Just one more would give me enough books for my enchanting table. Unfortunately, this village had neither of those things. On my way out, I found a ruined portal that had 3 gold blocks, but not much in the chest. I used the oak wood I got from the mineshaft to craft myself a boat, and set off into the unknown. I stopped once the sun had set to again skip the night. There will come a point where I'm more established that I don't need to sleep much, but in these early days I didn't want to take unnecessary risk. This next village had sheep, which weren't cows, so I stole a blast furnace and set sail for the next. In this one I found bread, and more importantly books, which meant I now had enough for level 30 enchantments. So at this point it was just a matter of figuring out where I wanted to settle down and build my base. Making my way toward the pillager outpost, I found a lava pool, and decided now would be as good a time as any to get the obsidian I would need for the nether portal and enchantment table. I collected enough for a 3-wide portal, because symmetry. It was already night again, so I made it not night. When morning arrived, I decided that the pillager outpost probably wasn't worth checking out just yet, and instead went over to the village. I know it probably doesn't make sense that I'm still looting villages, but one thing that I didn't mention is that there's actually a chance to find oak saplings in blacksmith chests, so I figured it would be worth checking them out while searching for my future base location. Speaking of, what I was looking for was a large flat area with some structures nearby. And while I had found a few spots that were decently flat, none were large enough for what I had planned. I found my first blacksmith in the next village, and while I wasn't quite lucky enough to get a sapling, I did get 2 iron picks, some extra bread, and a few iron ingots. Then I was on my way again, and I won't bore you too much with all the walking. Just know that I eventually made it to this village, where I found a second blacksmith, this one having a surprising amount of obsidian and some diamond horse armor. Across the water from it, I found this area here, which met all of my criteria. It was flat, large, and had a pillager outpost and a village within walking distance. So I decided that this area on the bottom would be the build site of my endgame base, and for now, I'd build my starter base on the hill overlooking it. So I took a moment to clean out my inventory and had what I hoped would be the final sleep for a while. To help make sure that was the case, I began spawn-proofing the area, placing torches in a grid-like pattern with 6 blocks between them. During the process, it actually started to rain. Except this is the desert, of course, so it just meant today was going to be a little darker than usual. which I really didn't mind since it made it easier to see where I needed to place torches. I continued placing them into the night until I had a decently sized area that was spawn-proof. Then I could safely begin working on my base. After witnessing a rabbit do what rabbits do best, I made my way into the nearby sandstone cave to begin collecting materials. As I was lighting it up, I walked right into a mine shaft with a cave spider spawner. Luckily, I was quick enough with my torches to prevent them from spawning, and I realized that this might make for a decent XP farm in the future. I did a little more exploring, placing torches and killing mobs as I went, and decided to try replenishing the coal I'd used on all the torches, starting with the Fortune 3 gold pick I found at the ruined portal. It didn't last that long, of course, but I figured it was the best use for it since I couldn't mine diamonds with it. Back at the entrance, I began collecting the sandstone I would need for my temple. I wasn't sure how much I'd need, but I kept mining into the morning of day 7, when I had gathered almost 7 stacks of sandstone. I turned said sandstone into cut sandstone and began building. I didn't need this base to be too big, just big enough to store my items and crafting stations. I could focus on building something cooler once I had better tools. By sunset, the outside was finished, and I began working on the entrance and floor, replacing the sand with cut sandstone. Once it was done, I started moving my things inside, placing the crafting area on the left side and the storage on the right. And I'm not gonna make you watch me organize this mess. I placed in those blast furnaces I stole and decided that I wanted to have tunnels underneath the base, kind of like the catacombs that some pyramids have, just way less cool. I made a stone cutter to complete the crafting area, and tossed a stack of iron ore into the blast furnaces since my pickaxe wasn't looking so good. Using some ladders, I dug out the first of the tunnels. The main purpose of this one was just to connect it to the cave that I was getting my sandstone from, because I guess it was just too difficult for me to walk outside to get there. Once the tunnels were connected, I was officially one step closer to never needing to see the sun again. From there, I worked on making the tunnel 3 blocks tall, because if there's anything that I dislike more than the sun, it's hitting my head on these cramped walkways. Once that problem was solved, I carried on mining sandstone for a while. What this sandstone was for, the world may never know, but it was a nice relaxing break. Next up, I wanted to build my nether portal, which I also wanted to put in the tunnels so it wouldn't take up half my base. Once I had dug out a big enough area, I placed it in. Made some new tools, and crafted the enchantment table, which was the main reason I wanted to go back to the nether. I didn't want to use all my wood on bookshelves for it, so it was time for round 2. I couldn't decide if this spawn was luckier or unluckier than the first. Sure, I was right next to a fortress, but I wasn't sure if that was a good thing yet. I took out a few blazes at the spawner near my portal, but I didn't want to push my luck, and when this magma cube dropped some magma cream, I took it as a sign that I should make some fire res potions before going for the rest of the blaze rods. So began the hunt for nether warts, which didn't take too long. I took the soul sand too, so I could start my own farm back at home. But I still hadn't gotten what I had come here for in the first place: wood. Looking around, I was able to spot a couple of warped forests in the distance, but I didn't really want to risk traveling that far, so I followed a tunnel through the mountain which led me straight to a crimson forest. I played ping pong with a ghast for a while until he got bored. Cool. Then began bridging over the gap with the sandstone I mined earlier. Turns out it was useful after all. On the other side, I built stairs down to the ground, and I could finally reach it. But not without going through this guy, who I learned could kill me in 3 hits. So I played to my advantages: running and smartness. With that guy out of the way, the forest was mine, and I started chopping, dispatching hoglins when needed, until I had 30 logs, which I believed would be enough for the bookshelves. I was almost back to my portal when I was cut off by a couple of wither skeletons. I even got a wither skull from one. After getting abused trying to go through my portal, I mined out another small room connected to the tunnel where I could farm my nether warts. I used 1 blaze rod to make a brewing stand, followed by some bottles of water. I chucked them into the stand with a wart and worked on making another small room for the enchanting setup. Again, there was nothing too fancy here. I was mainly focused on functionality for the time being. In order for the enchantment table to do me any good, I was going to need a way to farm XP. So on day 10, I got some materials together and went back to the cave where I found the cave spider spawner. My goal was to build the entire farm without following a tutorial. The only thing I used as a reference was a chart that showed the radius that mobs could spawn in around a spawner. This way I'd know exactly how tall and wide the room would need to be. Mining out a room this size with iron picks was a slow process, the top half taking up all of day 10, but I didn't want to use the durability of my diamond pick before enchanting it. And still needing to lower the floor of the room by quite a lot, I came up with an idea for a shortcut. Running over to a nearby temple I had noticed a few days earlier, I broke my way in and looted just about everything I could find in the chests. But the chests weren't the reason I was here. I wanted the TNT. What I didn't want, however, was to blow up the spawner with it, so I decided to mine out another layer to play it safe. Then I began blowing up the outer edges and cleaning up the rest of the room until I was left with this. I dug out a small area underneath where I would stand with my weapon of choice, and connected it back to the cave with a staircase. For the killing area, I played with a few different designs, and decided I'd test this one out and tweak it as needed. I added the water around the edges of the room that would allow me to push the spiders to the center. After removing the torches, I blocked off the room, allowing me to give the farm a try. What I noticed immediately was that it wasn't very easy to hit the spiders through the gap of a glass pane. And on top of that, the XP couldn't even fit through. I tried replacing one of the blocks next to it with stairs, thinking the XP would be able to drop down, but while that made it noticeably easier to kill the spiders, I still wasn't close enough to pick up the XP. I swapped all the surrounding blocks with stairs since those seemed to be a step in the right direction, and after making sure the coast was clear, I replaced the glass pane with a trapdoor. In theory, this would allow me to jump up and grab the XP. But I was quickly reminded that mobs can hit you through trapdoors. So I tried standing on a slab, which I thought fixed it at first, but the XP was slowly accumulating in the middle still. With all that testing, I came to the conclusion that I was just going to have to wait until the coast was clear and open the trapdoor every so often. Band-aid fixes applied, I spent all of day 13 farming XP, and at the end of it, I reached level 32. Happy to be doing anything other than swinging a sword for a while, I reorganized some of my items, giving stone-related blocks their own chests, and then I was ready to do my first enchanting. Of course, the first enchantment I always go for is Fortune 3, but that wasn't an option, and none of the other enchants were worth taking, so I had to refresh them. I put a level 1 enchant on a throwaway iron pick, and then this happened. Yes! Luck. No way. After almost an hour and a half building the XP farm and using it, it was a huge relief to have it actually pay off like that. I didn't wait long before heading into the cave to test it out. Really, I just wanted to mine anything that I could find with my new fortune pick. Diamonds being the main goal, of course. Little did I know that it would actually be 3 days until I returned to the surface again. Normally, I wouldn't mine all the coal that I'd find, but I had to keep my supply up for torches so you guys would actually be able to see what was going on. For a while, all I was finding was coal and iron, with the occasional mob fight, per usual. To save on inventory slots, I was turning the coal into coal blocks, and I won't even bother trying to explain that mess. I'm obviously not going to show every single time I mined some coal here, else I'd put you to sleep. Or maybe that's why you're watching this. What I will show you, however, is all the cool stuff I find along the way, like this fossil. I made sure to mine every last bone block in case I'd ever have a need for bone meal in the future. Shortly after, I ran into my first diamonds of the trip. It was only a 2 vein, but I still got 5 from it thanks to the fortune. Since I was at deep slate level now, I started finding a lot more lapis, redstone, and gold. And while mining this one, heard a lot more zombies than usual. A little mining uncovered the reason why. I spammed down a few torches and retreated up the stairs because my axe wasn't really suited for handling that many mobs in a tiny corridor. After killing the final zombie, I popped open the chest to find a saddle and some other random stuff. From this point on, my main goal was to really just keep going deeper in the cave. I wasn't going home until I had enough diamonds for a full set of armor. I shot my bow for the first time here, and realized that there was really no point if I still had to hit the mob twice with my axe after. In this large open part of the cave, I actually found a slime and got a slime ball, something that would be very useful later on in the video. I found some more diamonds on the ceiling of the cave, and followed a mine shaft to some more, this time a vein of 2. It took a while to find a chest there, and the loot made me question why I'd even tried in the first place. But there was a good bit of gold at least. These 2 skeletons were clearly just a couple of boneheads, and I found their home soon after. The loot was actually a lot better with this one, giving me melon seeds, diamond horse armor, and a name tag. Approximately 6 minutes, 30 seconds, and 11 milliseconds later, I found more diamonds. Followed by some more diamonds, and some more diamonds. I was still short by a couple though, so the hunt continued into day 17, where I found another 2 batches of diamonds guarded by this guy. And with the most unlucky rolls of fortune, those brought my total from 23 diamonds to 30. This meant I could finally go home. Surprisingly, I managed to find a way back to the surface without digging. It just took 10 minutes. But home turned out to be just around the corner, and I've gotta say, not a bad haul. I crafted up the full set of diamond armor, totally not almost crafting 2 pairs of pants, and combined the extra diamonds with the one from the first trip, which I intended to use for tools. I wasn't impressed by the first batch of enchants, and decided to just take a chance on the Unbreaking 3 chest, hoping it would roll nicely. I was actually very happy with Fire Prot on the chest. I know there's a lot of people who would want regular protection, but you don't wear a chest plate much once you get an elytra, and being able to throw on a piece of Fire Prot armor is a game changer if you fall into lava. I took a power 4 enchant on my bow as well. For now, I put everything into my storage since I didn't really have the XP to fully enchant anything, and I generally try to avoid using my first set of diamond until it has Unbreaking. Since XP was the major bottleneck right now, and my cave spider farm just didn't drop very much, I brewed some fire res potions and collected everything I would need for a simple gold farm. The problem was, I needed a large flat area in another waste biome, and there just wasn't anything like that around me. This spot across the lava looked like the best area I was going to get, so I began mining a tunnel over. Once I got a bit closer, I had to build a staircase down, but there wasn't really an easy way to do that, so I did a cannonball. On the other side, I built the staircase up so I could get back, and boxed in all the lava falls to keep them from spreading. This is a really simple gold farm design which basically just tricks the zombie piglins into falling down the pit, where I can kill them with my sword. The farm was ready for action on day 20, meaning all I had to do was lure them in. At first, the farm seemed to be working great. The XP felt a lot faster compared to the cave spider spawner. But the thing about this design is that it relies very heavily on having a flat area where mobs can spawn. And by the looks of it, this wasn't going to cut it. I still wanted to get some use out of it though, so for the next 8 minutes I ran around in circles to lure more zombie piglins into the trap. Killed them as I went, and reached level 32. So 2 levels in 8 minutes. Out of curiosity, I decided to compare it to the trusty method of mining quartz. And even though I wanted to try to get my XP in a more unique way, after quartz got me a full level in just over a minute, I realized trying anything else would only slow me down. So with my fate sealed, I continued mining quartz for a while before taking a moment to restock on wood. On the way back to the portal, I hit level 37. And yeah, I realized there wasn't really a point of having fire protection on the chest if I was going to carry fire res potions all the time. None of the available enchants were any good, so I had to refresh them. That got me a prot 4 enchant on my helmet. Then another refresh, make that 2 refreshes, until I got an Unbreaking 3 book, which would be perfect to combine with my helmet. Then it was back to the nether for a second to get more levels, and punch a zombie piglin on accident. Luckily there weren't that many in the area and I was able to whittle them down from atop my pedestal. Soon after, I hit level 33, and went back home to cash in. Starting with Protection 4 on my leggings, which also rolled Unbreaking 3, and then a Hail Mary attempt with this Unbreaking 3 enchant on my bow that actually gave me Power 4. Meaning I'd be able to combine them for Power 5 later on. And you'll never guess what I did next. "32 levels was good enough for now, and I added the quartz to my growing collection before showing an uninvited guest to the door. The first batch of enchants weren't too good, but the second gave me infinity, which I don't normally take, but since I didn't have access to mending, or arrows for that matter, I decided I'd roll with it for this playthrough. Now that I had all the pieces to a great bow, I could finally put them together to create something usable. But with all the quartz mining that I'd been doing, I was getting the urge to take a break. What shall we do? You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna raid this. So in the middle of the night, I approached the tower, careful not to make too much noise. The outpost only had 2 pillagers, and the chest gave me potatoes, a goat horn, and some dark oak wood. Making my descent, I realized that the encounter had left me wanting more. And so I walked to a distant coastline and stared into the ocean. And for a moment, the ocean stared back, and it became clear to me what needed to be done. With my new friend safe at home, I was ready to move on to the next step here, which was to collect enough ender pearls for the dragon fight. And I figured the best way to do that was to travel to a warped forest biome. I knew exactly where to go, because I noticed this little area of warped forest here while bridging over for the gold farm. Something I also wanted to work on was getting my levels back up, since my armor still needed some work. I also got this advancement somehow. Back in the warped forest, I worked on trapping my first enderman, which dropped a warped nylium block. Now the thing about this warped forest was that it was really small, so I wanted to try digging upwards in hopes of running into a larger area. But that never happened, so if I wanted ender pearls, I was going to need to find a new one. On the way, I continued working on my levels, mining quartz and gold this time. Exploring behind the gold farm, I came to a dead end and decided to try my luck mining through the wall. If you remember from earlier, I spotted another warped forest straight ahead from my portal. That was the one I was trying to find, and when I heard an enderman, I knew I had made it. Thankfully, this one was way bigger than the last, and I was able to start working on those pearls. There was also another fortress nearby that would make for a good place to farm wither skeleton skulls, but I had different priorities right now, like fighting the Houdini of Enderman. But I bet him he couldn't do that twice. The rest of the day, I worked on killing Enderman, ending up with a total of 6 pearls at the end. Day 25 was a lot of the same. After a few Endermen though, I found a piglin I could trade with using the gold I'd been mining. And with any luck, he'd give me some pearls to help speed up the process. After a few minutes of trading, I dropped down to make sure nothing despawned, and sorted through the loot. I got 5 pearls from the guy, and with the last ingot traded, I nearly lost it all. I'm not sure how that guy got up there, but I'm glad it was just one. The show had to go on though, so I started collecting the last of the pearls. It took me the entirety of the day, but I got quite a few extra to be sure that I wouldn't need to come back. So I was going to finish mining some of the quartz that I missed in the area when I made a mistake. And I might have been fine just turning around and fighting the Enderman here, but it was going to take me just as many hits to kill him as it would take him to kill me. So it was lucky that I still had a boat placed here. After my second near-death experience of the trip, I was ready to get out of here. It took me a while to actually find the little tunnel I crawled out of. On the other side, I did some more quartz mining with the hopes that I'd have enough levels to finally finish those armor enchants when I got back. I got into a little scuffle back at the fortress, but I just popped a fire res potion to get me through it. Crafting up all the quartz, I almost had a full row of blocks now. Down in the enchanting room, I got myself a second pick so I wouldn't need to waste the fortune one on random blocks anymore. And for the second enchant, I got this sword. Next was protection 4 on the boots, but since they were also missing on breaking 3, I had the choice of re-rolling those or the helmet. And since the boots had an extra enchant, I chose the helmet. I didn't get any luckier than the first time, but you can't win them all. Having all the pearls now, the next step was to collect the blaze rods, which just so happened to be a great way to get the XP back. I chose to break the spawner and move to a different one though, because I didn't like that it was so close to my portal. The new one being in a closed off room meant that I could clear the blocks around it for better spawn rates, so I worked on that while farming them. At this point I had more than enough blaze rods, but I stayed to kill a few more until I was level 33. This way I'd have enough for 2 level 30 enchants. I'm gonna go for another reroll. I know it's a little bit crazy, but we need unbreaking on this. There is definitely unbreaking on that. There was no way to live up to the last enchant, so this chest plate ended up being a little useless. But I couldn't complain. Out of every XP farming method I had tried so far, killing blazes was by far the most fun. Mining blocks can be relaxing sometimes, but it gets a little repetitive after a while. Running around and hitting things was a nice change of pace, and possibly even more efficient. I got to level 33 again, and re-rolled the chest another 2 times. The first was a dud, and I wasn't expecting much from the Prot 3 enchant, but I knew I had to keep this. The only thing that still needed work was the boots, so I restocked my potions and returned to battle. I don't have much to talk about this time, so here's a little time lapse of me getting back to level 33. The only thing I was waiting for was feather falling, that way I could combine the 2 pairs of boots. But both rerolls gave me Depth Strider instead, so I just decided to recycle the table until I was guaranteed feather falling, thinking that would save me time in the long run. Eventually, I had the option of Feather Falling 3, and I just took it. After combining them with my other boots, my armor was fully decked out, and I figured I might as well finish the bow while my levels were already low. I marked down my coords in the chat, and was ready to look for the stronghold. With the Ender Eyes leading me to the water, I had no choice but to leave my camel behind. I decided to put him on the island so he wouldn't escape, and so began one of the most confusing moments I've ever experienced. I don't know if I entered the Bermuda Triangle here or something, but my sense of direction was just nowhere to be found. After that complete embarrassment, I continued the journey via doggy paddle. It ended up being further away than I was expecting, but I eventually narrowed it down to somewhere in this ocean, and swam down to one of the underwater caves, where I continued digging into a new cave, which eventually opened up into this massive room where I spotted the exposed library. The enchanted books weren't too great, but everything else was nice. And the portal room turned out to be just around the corner. I didn't really expect to be ready for the dragon fight this early, but I guess only having a desert biome didn't really hinder me much after all. I did a quick rundown of my gear in case you wanted to see it for some reason, and went in. The platform was completely boxed in, but I guess I'd prefer that over being able to fall off. That aside, I decided I'm not going to narrate this one, as I don't think you need me talking over it to enjoy it. The XP from the dragon brought me up to level 67, and I was ready to get my elytra right away. I pillared up and did the trapdoor trick, and on the other side, spotted an end city right away. One with an end ship as well. Next was the part where you bridge over death, and then mine more blocks so you can do it again. I was really hoping that this wouldn't turn into one of these moments, but I was okay. I grabbed some more blocks to use as scaffolding, and chose to enter the city the way it was intended instead of pillaring up. I took out the security guards and parkoured my way up to the top. I wasn't planning on focusing too hard on the shulker shells since I don't usually end up using that many, but I was going to need to clear the place out anyway, so I grabbed whatever dropped along the way. In the first chests, I found a free shovel, some gold ingots, and a mending pickaxe. I used one of the chests to craft a shulker box and started clearing a way up to the end ship. There wasn't anything exciting in this chest, but that was alright because I still had the ship left. After bridging across, I broke through the bottom of the ship, took out the shulker, and got the elytra. In the chest, I found some iron and a chest plate with fire breaking 2. Yeah, sometimes I can't read. With everything loaded into the shulker box and the dragon head claimed, I used one of the few rockets I had scraped together and pearled through the gateway. On the way back, I remembered to grab the egg, and was then reminded how dumb of an idea it was to break my bed and bring it along. Having just 5 rockets left meant I wasn't going to be able to make it the whole way home, and after realizing how fast the durability of an elytra goes down without unbreaking, I decided not to use it anyway. So I settled for a nice jog under the night sky with a side of annoying phantoms. They weren't actually that bothersome since I could use the membranes to repair my elytra. That being said, they're still my least favorite thing in the entire game. Since I had a membrane now, I equipped the elytra to give myself a much needed boost over the mountain. I'd made it most of the way home by sunrise, but began taking my time so I could collect all the sugarcane I found along the way. With my camel retrieved, I made it back to base, still collecting all the sugarcane, and bringing my total for the trip up to about 3.5 stacks. I crafted as many rockets as I could make, and then combined that elytra with the extra Unbreaking 3 book from earlier, and used a membrane to repair it. The next thing on my agenda was to create a mob farm. For the materials, the main thing I was missing was building blocks, but now that I could insta-mine sandstone, collecting those was a breeze. And before long, I had mined out a big room and filled the entire shulker box. All that was left now was to collect trapdoors and carpet, so I went into the nether, where I got a second skull, and I didn't even have looting yet. Over at the Crimson Forest, I collected all the wood I was going to need for the trapdoors. I was here for around 10 minutes before I had what I thought would be enough. Putting a blaze out of its misery, I returned home, and thought about exactly where I wanted to put this thing. Building it over the ocean would mean I could build it slightly lower than I could over the land, so I opted for that, swimming out to some small islands not far off the coast. The first step was going to be removing all the sand that was above sea level. I could have just spawn-proofed it, which, looking back, would have been a lot faster since I couldn't insta-mine sand, but after spending all day digging, I came up with an alternative method of just flooding the entire thing. That still took half the night, but at least I could finally begin building. After pillaring up to the desired height, I began branching off to build the killing platform. Then the collection system. And the drop chute, mixing in some chiseled sandstone so the entire thing wasn't just one texture. At the top, I began building the base of the spawning platforms. This area would have water around all the edges to catch the mobs and push them into the center as they fall down. I'll leave a link in the description to the tutorial for this design in case you're interested. However, I will warn you that if you have redstone, you're probably much better off building a design that utilizes dispensers and water buckets to push the mobs off the platforms, as farms like this one that rely on mobs just walking off the platforms on their own are way less efficient and not really worth your time, especially if you make a mistake and need to rebuild an entire layer. But I'm not trying to hate on this farm design. If you need an early game farm, this one will do the job. I was just dumb and decided to build it in the late game because I was too lazy to craft redstone components. After placing in the trapdoors on the final layer and opening them all up, I had to make a quick trip back to the base and into the mine, so I could use the string from the cave spider spawner to make wool and carpet. So I guess it turned out to be useful for something after all. Placing the carpet in the middle was a matter of personal preference. It prevents all spiders from spawning, which was perfect for me since I already had a spider farm and didn't need them clogging this one up. So I placed the final few layers of the wall and added the roof, sealing it all off. With the water placed in, torches removed, and fence gates opened up, the farm was complete, and it was just a matter of waiting. It took a little while for the farm to get started, but at least it was working. The XP, however, was getting stuck in the hoppers, so I placed some slabs over it and then removed the row above instead. I also noticed I forgot to place torches on the roof, and that definitely wasn't going to do the wraiths any favors. With the roof fully lit up, I was ready to start using it. But this is when I realized just how slow it actually was. The problem wasn't that mobs weren't spawning, they just took forever to leave the platforms. But at least I had a source of gunpowder. I farmed up mobs for the next 20 minutes straight to see how much loot I could get. So there went the rest of day 37 and most of day 38. By the end of it, I had enough gunpowder for 4.5 stacks of rockets, which would be enough to last me a while. Taking a minute to decide what exactly I wanted to do next, I changed my mind about not trading with villagers. The thing is, I could find tools and armor with mending in end cities, but I wasn't going to be able to get it on an elytra without the help of villagers. Before I could start trading, I was going to need a way to get emeralds. The easy method of trading sticks wasn't really going to work well here since I couldn't actually grow trees. But that was fine because I wanted to mix things up anyways, so instead I was going to plant a massive field of sugarcane. I did a quick enchant on my shovel so I'd be able to flatten out the area as needed. The area in question was the spot just across the river from my temple. And the first order of business was to unite the two rivers. I mean, it just looked like they should have been connected to begin with. Moving on to the sugarcane field, I wanted to use the most efficient layout possible. And by planting it in this pattern here, I could have the perfect sugarcane to water ratio of 4:1, while still utilizing every block of space. The main downside of this being that placing the water was going to get more difficult the further inland I went. And I was going to be going very far inland. I don't know how I got so invested in this, but I ended up spending an hour and a half planting this sugarcane. Almost 5 days straight of working on this sugarcane field. And to be honest, I don't even know how to narrate over this part since it was just the same thing the entire time. One thing I do think is interesting is how you slowly get faster as you do repetitive tasks like this. You start out not really knowing what the best strategy is, and then you figure out little ways of improving as you go. And before you know it, you're practically a sugarcane planting robot who created this monstrosity. And we're not done yet, but I had to interrupt it to show myself rescuing the allays from the outpost. With how dense this field was, it was really difficult to see the drops after harvesting it, so having allays to help was a game changer. One of the zombies I killed that night dropped a carrot, which meant I might finally put all my gold to use, in the form of golden carrots. But for the moment, I was still very much focused on this sugarcane. The following night, I took some time to test out my new piercing arrows, and managed to get a music disc that I was most likely never going to listen to. Day 43, I finally finished the farm, having enough leftover sugarcane to fill an entire row. After dropping the allays off at their fence post, I crafted up a couple lecterns and used the dirt I got from my cave to bone meal those carrots I found. I continued farming them until I had a few stacks and used some gold to turn them into golden carrots. Happy to be ending my 43-day bread-only diet, I flew over to the neighboring village to finally meet my soon-to-be employees. After causing 4 of them to lose their jobs, they had no choice but to come work for me, and thus the process of refreshing trades could begin. In a couple minutes, I got my first useful trade, but I wasn't taking anything except mending books for my elytra, which probably meant I was going to be here for a while. It wasn't long before the sun was setting, and I decided to sleep since I couldn't do any trading during the night. Day 45 was a day full of trade refreshing, and sadly it wouldn't be the last. But that's just how trading is. Sometimes you get what you're looking for in a couple of minutes, and other times it takes you a couple of hours. Once night had arrived, I realized that I didn't want to waste any more time sleeping, and instead spent the night at the mob farm. Day 46 was different though, but only because it was cloudy. The villagers were still just as uncooperative. For anyone curious of what my other options were for getting a mending book, there was also a chance I could get them from fishing or stronghold chests. I didn't think either of those would be any faster than trading though, so if I wanted my elytra to actually be useful, I really didn't have a choice but to grind this part out. The rest of the trading for the day was unfruitful, and I again returned to the mob farm, trying to make the most of the night. Thankfully, after 3 minutes of trading on day 47, I finally got a mending trade. Before I could buy it, I needed to trade for a bookshelf to get the book, but after a few paper trades, I finally had it. Back at base, I added it to the elytra, and did one more big harvest of the sugarcane field, this time so I could load up a shulker box with everything I would need for rockets. Once it was fully harvested and the allays finished retrieving the drops, I was able to fill half my shulker box. What I did next was turn all of it into paper and use some to top off my rockets. Next it was time to go back to the Nether, but not for what you think. My goal was to create a portal that would allow me to get to my stronghold faster. To actually use it though, I would need to light it. So I had to stop back at my home for flint and steel, but then I was ready to test if the cords I had were actually right. And I did end up in the same cave system as the stronghold, but I was going to need to move the portal to a better spot. It wasn't long before I located the stronghold again and set my nether portal up just behind the end portal. But what I realized is that I forgot to add gunpowder to the rocket chest. So I had to leave again and go back to the overworld so I could grab it from the mob farm. Once I was back, I was finally ready to enter the end dimension. And now you're probably wondering why I wanted to come here in the first place. While I might have had mending on my elytra, I still needed to get it on the rest of my armor and tools. So what I did was pick a direction and set off looking for end cities. In these end cities, I was only going to focus on looting the chests. In the first one, I got a silk touch pickaxe. In the beginning, it took me some time to recognize which structures had chests in them from the outside. But with some practice, I'd soon be able to count how many chests the city had before I even got to it. Using that silk touch pick, I was able to steal the ender chest, and from the chest behind it, I got some diamonds. Now, this end city looting ended up taking about an hour, so I'm not going to go through every chest I got. Instead, I'll just show you the ones that had something important in them. At the second end city, I got a diamond chestplate with mending on it, so that was one of the 4 mending pieces acquired. Unfortunately, the next few cities didn't have a whole lot, but I eventually came across an end ship that had a smite sword and a second chestplate with mending. The pants also had mending, but with fire protection on them, so they weren't really usable. Another chest in the same stronghold gave me a decent pair of helmets, but again, the fire protection had to ruin the mending. On the bright side, I was getting a lot better at looting the end ships now, not even needing to go inside to loot the chests. I was getting better at looting the other buildings as well, grabbing the chests from above. This one had frostwalker boots and a nice pick, as well as a good helmet in the chest across from it. In the next end city, I got an efficiency 5 mending shovel. The one after that, another mending shovel. And of course, by now the diamonds were starting to pile up. I figured this sword would be a good one for the string farm if I ever ended up using it again. Speaking of good swords, I finally got one with mending on it, along with some mending pants that were ruined by fire protection yet again. A little later, this looting 2 sword was a nice find since I didn't have looting at all yet. At this point, I was really starting to add to my shovel collection. These boots had mending, but blast protection. Luckily, short after, I found these pants, and while they had cursive binding, I was willing to wear them, but only if I couldn't find some without binding by the end of the run. I might not have been having the best luck with the mending armor so far, but the tools were going well. Eventually, I got my hands on a mending helmet with protection 4, meaning the only piece I was missing was the boots. In the very next end city, I found them, as well as a pair of mending pants that didn't have binding, which was good because I tend to prefer pants that aren't super glued to my skin. On day 52, I was back in the overworld. I ended up needing to fly the whole way back to base since I still had my bed with me. But once I was back, I repaired my elytra at the mob farm and began deciding which pieces of armor I was going to combine to make the final set. These 2 shulkers here held all the end city loot in case you wanted to see. I combined my boots first, and that was when I realized how expensive this was going to be. The pants were next, followed by the helmet, but for the chest I was going to need 34 levels. I also wanted to see what the pickaxes were going to cost me, and yeah. There was a lot of XP to be farmed. I decided to craft up an anvil that I could bring to the mob farm with me, and started farming. But after 5 minutes had passed, I was only level 14, and this was taking way too long. So I started collecting some sandstone so I could add some more layers to the mob farm. I wasn't sure how much that would actually help it, but at this point, I would take any small bit of improvement I could get. After 5 minutes, I had enough sandstone to fill an entire shulker. But I was also going to need some wood for the trapdoors, so it was time to go back to the nether and over to that warped forest biome. This warped forest biome is where I would spend the rest of day 53. I didn't just want to get enough wood for the trapdoors, I wanted to get enough to last me through the entire playthrough. In the end, I had just over 6 stacks, and went back to the farm where I finally removed the sand pillar I used to build it. The ceiling was also going to need removed so I could actually add the new layer. Once the walls were in place, I decided that I was going to try something a little different with these layers. Instead of having individual 3x3 platforms, I made 3 larger ones to increase the spawning space. I wasn't sure if this would actually be an improvement over the last design, but at the very least, these extra layers would improve the farm overall. So I didn't exactly have a whole lot to lose. Platforms completed and phantoms defeated, I grabbed some string from the base and made carpet to keep the spiders from spawning. And then I repeated that process another 2 times, adding a total of 3 new layers to the farm, and more than doubling the amount of spawning space. Giving it a test run, it was definitely much faster than it was before, and I did manage to get to level 23 and put mending on my fortune pick. But going from unbearingly slow to okay still wasn't doing it for me. So what I ended up doing was crafting another anvil and heading into the nether, where I dug straight down with some ladders. Once I got to Y13, I began digging. My goal here was to try and take out 2 birds with 1 stone. I figured I could begin looking for ancient debris, and in the meantime, mine all the quartz I found along the way to get XP. With the pickaxe always needing mended though, that second goal may be harder than I originally thought. Regardless, I was still going to need the ancient debris, and so, for the next hour, I mined out a massive network of tunnels, mainly using the chunk border method to find enough for 5 ingots. Back at home, I had a total of 20 ancient debris, and I also mined a lot of quartz too. But as you can see, the majority of the XP went toward mending the pickaxe, so I still needed levels. On day 59, I went back to the nether so I could mine more quartz for XP. This time finding it on the surface to minimize the pickaxe repairs, which at first there were quite a lot of. It took a while to repair the damage from the ancient debris mining, but once it was finally full durability, I could actually start farming levels. I also collected whatever gold I ran into along the way, as I was starting to stockpile quite a lot of it, and I thought I might be able to use it later for a beacon. I encountered another Houdini that day, this time taking the form of a ghast. I think it's a little crazy how much XP mining quartz gives you compared to other things. Like, I invested several hours into building my cave spider farm and mob farm, and the XP I get from those just isn't even comparable to the quartz. But at the end of the day, I needed to get the XP one way or another, and that included killing piglins if necessary. Once I was level 34, I could finally do this. That's the chest plate. Whoa. And so that was my armor fully enchanted. I did have a couple more things that I wanted to combine though, starting with these 2 pickaxes. So after farming up the levels for those, and getting attacked by another ghast who caught a fireball to the face, I decided to farm up enough levels for the swords as well. I wasn't exactly sure how much that was, but I figured somewhere around 20 should be a safe bet. To play it extra safe, I ended up going the whole way to 24. After making it back to the portal, I turned all the gold I collected into blocks, and grabbed the 2 swords, which only ended up costing 14 levels. Placing all my quartz into a shulker, I now had over 1,000 blocks. I can't say I had any plans for actually using any of it, but it was worth it. Here I combined 2 shovels into a perfect one with my leftover levels. Having my enchantments figured out, it was time to put that ancient debris I mined to good use. The only thing was, I didn't have a smithing template yet, which meant I had to go raid some bastions. And I managed to find one pretty much instantly. They caught me trying to steal the gold though, so I had no choice but to use force. I was going to be relying on my bow quite a lot here, because there was no point of getting up close and personal with the brutes. That was only going to make things unnecessarily dangerous. The first chest didn't give me what I was looking for, but that was fine because it just meant I could continue my target practice. The next chest wasn't any better, and to be honest, the layout of this bastion was confusing me. So I decided to go find another type I was more familiar with. On the way, I got this advancement for exploring all the nether biomes, and then found this bastion, which wasn't half buried like the last one. This not only made it easier to spot and kill the enemies, but also to spot the chests. The first one was again a dud, but that's okay because a few piglins dying to my bow later, I found this one, which also had nothing. Making my way to the final floor of the bastion, I opened up the chest, and there it was, the smithing template. I still decided to finish looting the rest though, finding another gold block, and even a chest, which I got an extra saddle from. Having cleared out the entire bastion, it was time to head home. However, I was having a difficult time finding my way back, and stumbled across another bastion, so I figured I might as well loot this one too. I won't go too in depth with the analysis on this one, but it was like shooting fish in a barrel. Not even this ghast was safe. I'll admit, I did get a little overconfident here, using the crossbow that I stole to shoot back at them, not realizing that was my only air. No, you idiot. Okay. Luckily, I had already cleared out the majority of the enemies, and was able to loot the chests, which gave me extra food and some magma cream, and in the next one, I got my arrow back. I then realized that I'd only been on the smaller end of the bastion, and began clearing out the main part. It was here where I really went all in with the bow. It was like a high stakes game of whack-a-mole, and I was landing some shots that even surprised me. From the first chest, I got a bunch of free food. Then it was back to sniper training until I had cleared out a path all the way down to the bottom of the bastion. Here I destroyed the magma cube spawner and cleared the rest of them out so I could loot the chest in safety. Getting some thorns pants, a netherite ingot, ancient debris, and another smithing template. I noticed another chest off to the side, but it turned out to have nothing. Just after leaving that bastion, I ran straight into another, and since I was having so much fun, I gave this one a go too. I won't bore you with all the sniping this time though, since it was basically identical to what I did with the first. I will still show off some of the chest loot though, and this moment here, which I found really funny. From the main chest, I got some netherite scrap, a netherite ingot, a smithing template, and some other random loot. On the other side of the bastion, I grabbed this chest here, which didn't really have much. Now I was actually ready to go home, and I wasn't going to let anything else distract me along the way. It was a bit of a pain to find my way back since I couldn't remember where I came from, and that led me to just digging through walls in the right direction as a last-ditch effort. I eventually found the first bastion though, and from there I knew the way back. It seemed I'd been followed though. And finally, after all that preparation, I could at last upgrade my gear to netherite. Taking what I had mined out of the furnace, I crafted up all the ingots, upgrading all 4 pieces of my armor first. And with what was left, I did the sword and both my pickaxes. Taking it a step further, I used the armor trims I found in the end cities to decorate it a bit. And it might not be a look that I would typically go for, but I thought it fit the desert theme quite nicely. That night, I gave it a little test run. So with the grind of upgrading gear behind me, I could finally begin working on those base plans I mentioned earlier in the video. And it wasn't because my current base was too small. I could easily fit everything I needed in there. It just wasn't as impressive as I'd like. So my plan was to build a massive pyramid in the space across the river. Of course, that was going to require a lot of blocks. So I pulled up my calculator to figure out just how many I would need. I was planning to build a 101 by 101 pyramid, meaning I'd need to get at least 10,201 blocks, which when rounded up comes out to about 6 shulkers of blocks. And the block of choice was of course going to be sandstone. Well, technically cut sandstone, but close enough. I wasn't sure if my 2 netherite picks were going to be enough to mine that many blocks, but they ended up making it the whole way through to the end. It only took about 6 minutes to fill up the first shulker, and just overall this went way faster than I expected, taking only half an hour to get all the required resources, and only using up 1.5 picks worth of durability. In the end, I had accumulated just under 6 shulkers. Before I moved on to the building, I wanted to make sure my picks were repaired again. Now, thanks to my super fast farm, it only took an entire day. So that was day 67, basically non-existent. But day 68 would be the first day of the building. That is, if I could get the area flattened in time. The whole area underneath the pyramid didn't necessarily need to be flat. That would have taken forever. I just needed some space for the frame. Turning all the sandstone into cut sandstone, I put exactly 101 blocks into my hotbar. the exact size I wanted each side to be. This would make it impossible for me to make a mistake, which is good because a mistake with the frame could lead me to needing to break and replace thousands of blocks later on. Filling up my hotbar again, this time with one less block since the corner was already in place, I worked on placing in the second side. The floating bits on this end of the pyramid could be filled in with extra blocks later. After that, I just worked on placing the last two sides, taking us into the night. And here's a sneak peek of just how big this thing was going to be. Then it was just a matter of placing all the remaining layers, a process that would take 3 whole days. To make it easier for myself, I put on a podcast. To make it easier for you, I created this time-lapse. So what you're watching is about an hour worth of block placing. During the nights, the mobs were a little annoying, but once I got up to the higher layers, they seemed to prefer spawning underneath rather than on top, which seemed very convenient during the building phase. After I had finished the entire build, and took a minute to appreciate how cool it looked, I realized I now had a pyramid full of mobs. So I went back to base and grabbed stuff to make torches. This way I could spawn-proof the whole thing. But this was going to be no easy task. I began by getting a torch placed directly in the middle, and just as I did with my old base, I placed a torch on every 7th block in a grid. And the mobs didn't exactly make this an easy process. But after 20 minutes of placing torches while being assaulted by mobs, I had the main parts of the pyramid spawn-proofed. All that was left was the craters and caves, and once those were lit up, this place was actually safe. For it to be usable though, I was going to need to patch up those gaps along the bottom. So into the night, I continued placing blocks, eventually running out of them, and needing to use the sand I dug to make more. And I didn't know what button I pressed here, but I didn't appreciate my inventory being scrambled. That night, I was able to completely finish filling in the gaps, and even took some time to make the land around the pyramid look much better. Then the outside of the pyramid was complete. To finish the inside, however, I was going to need an entrance. The next day, I began punching out a hole where it could go, only to notice that I didn't actually have the blocks to build anything. The obvious solution was to give up and cry, but I did the hard thing and went to the mines to collect more. I still wasn't sure exactly how big the entrance should be though. As an attempt to make it more proportional, I upped the scale a bit. But once the blocks were placed, I took a step back and realized that I didn't really like the result. So I tried giving the top more of a sloped look in hopes of making it look less plain. Once I had finished it though, I felt like I had made it even worse. So as one final ditch effort, I tore the whole thing down again so I could start from square one. And after replacing some of the blocks, I had my solution. For some reason, this little entrance looked way better in my opinion. Maybe because it was Steve-sized. Admiring the view of my new pyramid, I noticed a party of pillagers going for a swim in my river. This guy was going to come in handy later on in the video. But for now, I needed to figure out what I was going to do with the giant pyramid I just built, because the inside was pretty boring looking. The best thing I could think of was to replace the entire floor with grass. Having just spent the last 75 days surrounded by nothing but sand, I figured it would be cool to bring some life into the desert. To my knowledge, the only places I could get dirt from were villages or caves. Since the villages only had small patches of it, going with the caves seemed like a no-brainer. Even if that meant fighting all these extra mobs. Because of the way Minecraft pyramids work, I knew I was going to need just about the same amount of dirt as I did with the sandstone. So I brought the same 6 shulkers, and I wasn't planning on stopping until they were full. Obviously, collecting this much dirt was going to take a lot longer than the sandstone did, because I actually had to go out and find it. So, in case you're wondering how long it takes to dig 10,000 dirt, when caves are your only source, the answer is approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes. And that's not including the 15 minutes I spent repairing the shovels. So yeah, 5 in-game days spent digging dirt. With my sanity hanging on by a thread, I finally filled up the 6th shulker. After returning home, I realized I now had to place all that dirt, and I figured the simplest way to do that was placing all of it on top of the sand. This way it would automatically look natural without me needing to think too hard about it. So following the natural generation of the land, I began filling in my new floor. And I continued working on it for about 10 minutes before I thought of something else. Since I was going to be spending so much time placing all the dirt, it would make more sense to plant the grass down as I went, that way it could spread at the same time. Then I wouldn't have to waste time waiting for it to grow after. After scouting out a few villages, I came to this one here, which had 2 stables worth of grass. From those, I got 82 grass blocks, which would be plenty to get the spreading started. So all I did was scatter in a grass block every once in a while, and I would let nature take care of the rest. I continued placing down the dirt layer, not knowing that this part was going to take another hour and 10 minutes. But really, it went by kind of quickly for me. The best part about long grindy tasks like this is that they don't require a lot of brain power, which means you can watch YouTube or listen to a podcast, and before you know it, the blocks are placed. Unfortunately, the grass wasn't able to spread as fast as I was placing the blocks. So I began collecting a bunch from the fully grown side and replacing it with dirt so I could place some more grass on the other side and speed up the process. I continued repeating these steps for a while until I had grass placed the whole way to the other side of the pyramid. It was still going to take some time to grow, but not nearly as long as it would have been before. And believe it or not, I had bigger plans for this place than just planting grass. After replenishing my carrots, I was going to need to borrow the leads from the allays for the next part. So for now, I trapped them in my base, then set off in search of some villages. Not just any villages would do though. I needed some with animal pens so I could do this. Well, not that, but surely the second attempt would go smoother. Yeah, no, that one died too. What I was trying to do was fly the animals back to the pyramid, but it had been a while since I used this trick, so the first few were essentially my test dummies. The second cow was the first one that actually stayed on the lead, and I was able to fly him the whole way back home and land safely. The point of bringing the animals back to base was to continue the theme of restoring life. I wanted the pyramid to serve as a paradise of sorts, a place that felt alive compared to the barren desert. Over time, I got better at not killing the animals I was trying to rescue. I just needed practice to get the feel for it again. But if there was ever a cause worth dying for, it was surely my pyramid full of grass, I think. After getting the horse back to safety, I took some time to kill the mobs outside so I could mend up my elytra. After it was fully repaired, I went to another village where I found 2 cows, and this was the first time I was able to fly 2 animals home at the same time without dropping one. The best part about this was that if I got 2 of each animal, I could just repopulate them through breeding instead of playing taxi. While searching for more animals, I was also keeping a lookout for any blacksmiths, since that would be the only place I could get a sapling, and I figured the place needed a little more than grass and animals. With the pair of pigs secured, I set out on my way again, this time running into a village that had sheep, which were the last animal on my list. Technically, chickens would also be possible, but only through chicken jockeys. So with a pair of all the animals I could currently get, my sole mission now was to find a sapling. I'd survived 89 days so far and still had never seen a tree. From the first blacksmith I found, there was no sapling in sight. So I was on to the next one, but again, no luck. At moonrise, however, I found this village here, and in the blacksmith, I got them. Back at home, I released the allays from their holding cell, and returned them to their fence posts. Then took some of the bone blocks I got from that fossil and bastions and made an axe so I could start growing trees. I also grabbed some carrots and wheat so I could breed the animals. From there, I planted my first trees, and since 4 saplings probably wasn't going to be enough to fill this massive space, I had some sapling farming to do. So for the rest of day 89 and all of day 90, I was basically the Lorax. But I was also the exact opposite of the Lorax too, in a way. Sure, I was killing dozens of trees, but only so I could plant an entire forest. Moral dilemmas aside, the sapling part did take up all of day 90, so here's what that looked like. Once I had 55 saplings ready, I began scattering them around the entire room, making sure the trees weren't so close together that you wouldn't be able to see through them, but also that they weren't too far apart and making the forest seem too sparse. Those 55 saplings ended up not being enough for the whole room, so I had to go back to chopping trees for a while to get the final few. But soon enough, I had the rest of them gathered and was able to place in the last one. And that was the forest complete. It was definitely going to take some time for it to grow in though, so it was time for a change of scenery. I grabbed the 2 wither skulls I found earlier, repaired my bow, and went into the nether to find the third. Having just spent the last 10 hours building my pyramid, I was eager for something more exciting, and I figured fighting the Wither would check that box. I flew over to the fortress I found while farming ender pearls, because I figured this one would be better for Wither skelly spawns. And I might have been really lucky with the first 2 skulls, but I was going to pay for that luck now. Especially when I realized that I'd forgotten to add looting to my sword. But at least that meant I could use my bow since the drop rate would be the same. So it was a good thing I repaired it. And I've gotta say, using a bow is just way more satisfying than using a sword. Like, can you do this with a sword? Or this? Alright, perhaps it's a little less satisfying when you can't actually land any of the shots. But when they are hitting? It took about 10 minutes total for me to get the 3rd skull, and when I didn't even see it drop. But watching it back now, it was from the one that died to my thorns chestplate. With the skulls collected, I was ready to go home. Returning to the overworld, I crafted up a bunch of gold apples for the fight. And if you're wondering where the apples came from, I got them while planting my forest. Earlier on while exploring, I came across this huge basin. I totally didn't have to Google the definition of that word. This would be the perfect place to serve as the arena for the Wither fight, and with the day half over already, I couldn't waste any time. The first couple arrows just phased right through the Wither without doing any damage. But once they actually started hitting, I began lowering its health pretty quickly. To the point where I just decided to tank the skulls and end the fight sooner. I kind of regretted that though after a few hits and fell back to top off my health. Normally I have a blast protection chestplate and a smite sword when I fight the Wither, so I wasn't really used to the melee phase of the fight being that much of a brawl. It was still relatively easy nonetheless, and it wasn't until after I grabbed the Wither Star and took a look around the place when I noticed just how much damage it did to the arena floor. So I guess it was pretty lucky that I didn't fall into any hidden pits. But what was important was that the Wither was defeated. Back at home, I crafted up the beacon, which I wasn't actually ready to use yet because I wanted to make it out of gold, and I was still missing 36 blocks of it. So what I did was create another brewing stand so I could make a bunch of night vision potions. After harvesting my nether warts and part of the wall, I had everything I needed to brew them up. I made 12 total, which would give me 72 minutes of night vision. After finding a cave that looked like it would have potential, I popped my first potion. And this would give me the benefit of not needing torches, as well as allowing you guys to see much better. For 36 gold blocks, I was going to need 324 ingots, which comes out to just over 5 stacks. So I had a bit of mining to do. This bit of mining ended up taking a half an hour, but at least it wasn't as repetitive as building the pyramid was. And that's because there were plenty of mobs trying to interrupt my mining. I even got challenged to a 1v1 duel, which I handled quite nobly. And I was having fun outplaying skeletons. Totally outplaying skeletons. I also found this zombie spawner, which I got a golden apple from, as well as a few shin punches. And those were basically the highlights of day 93. I eventually reached a dead end in this cave and had to dig my way out to the surface so I could find a new one. Once I did, I was right back to killing mobs and mining gold. Just a few minutes later, I had filled up all 6 stacks in my inventory. I returned to the surface in the middle of the ocean, and when I got home, I loaded the gold into the blast furnaces and waited for it to smelt. That trip got me 48 gold blocks, leaving me with an extra 12. I did think about placing the beacon on top of the pyramid as one of those gold caps that they have sometimes, but I didn't think that would look very proportionate given how big my pyramid was. And there was also a chance that it wouldn't have enough range to reach the ground from there, so I just placed it on the inside. I chose resistance and regen for my buffs because I was probably going to need them for what I had planned next. On my way out, I had to deal with some guests who must have been drawn in by the giant beam that was now shining into the sky. I'm not sure where they all came from, but in their midst was a chicken jockey, and I thought if I could get the zombie off, I might have a chance at adding chickens to the pyramid. So I killed the creeper that was following us and led it to the center of the room where I got my first chicken. He wasn't as excited as I was. With day 96 beginning, I was running out of time to put my beacon to good use. And what a better way to do that than starting a raid. For that though, I was going to need to get a villager first, so I crafted up a boat and returned to my old friends at the village, where I selected this lucky gentleman. Luckily, iron golems aren't equipped with the ability to defend against kidnappings, so I was able to slowly escape to the sea, where I got this nice view of my pyramid. I dropped the villager off on the shore so I could grab a couple looms to lure him inside. Once I got him to the middle, I made a small room under the beacon where he'd be safe, and trapped him inside. For some reason, before starting the raid, I decided to take some time to breed the animals and repopulate the place. Even though I had pairs of every animal aside from chickens, it still felt pretty empty in here. It was at this point where I started looking for that chicken that I had rescued earlier. But after scouring the entire base, I couldn't find him. So I took a second to do some Googling, and what I learned was that chickens from a chicken jockey don't lay eggs and can actually despawn. So my one and only chicken was gone, but at least my herd of animals was growing. To grow it even more, I spent the next 5 minutes breeding them, in hopes of making the place feel more alive. Once I was satisfied with the population, it was finally time to fight that raid. And so the hunt for pillagers with banners began. I wanted to do the most difficult raid possible, so I was going to need to kill 5 of them. For that, I just continued the pattern of clearing them out and then flying away to let them respawn. After a few battles, I had officially been turned into a porcupine, but I was able to find the second raid captain. And in the night, I got the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. But before I could start the raid, I found this guy, and I knew what needed to be done. I put the chicken into a boat for now and grabbed the name tag I got from one of the dungeons so I could keep him from despawning like the last one. Once it was ready, I gave it to him. And it was time to escort Popcorn to his pyramid, which was going to be a slow walk, but I made sure he was safe.
Back, you demons. They're approaching from all angles. We domed him, Popcorn. I domed him. Airstrikes.
Needless to say, I took my role as Popcorn's security very seriously. So seriously, in fact, that I forgot I had Bad Omen. I wasn't really sure where the pillagers would spawn, but it didn't seem like they were inside the pyramid, so I went outside. And when I rounded the corner, I saw them climbing it. The pyramid seemed to have broken their pathfinding to the point that they weren't even attempting to attack me. So I continued killing them off until I'd finished the first wave. When the second wave also started climbing the pyramid, I knew for sure that they were broken now. This time, 2 of them did decide to use the entrance, but after killing them both and ensuring Popcorn was okay, I blocked off the entrance with sand so they'd have no choice but to fight me on top of the pyramid. And let's just say, forcing my enemies to climb 55 blocks of stairs to get to me gave me quite an advantage, and I was able to completely kill off the wave before they even got close enough to attack me. My goal was to focus fire the witches so they would never get close to me, but my aim from this high up and this kind of angle caused me to struggle a bit. Even when I got close to melee though, they still weren't attacking me. It was only once they reached the peak of the pyramid that they would begin fighting back, and so all I had to do was stop them from getting there. But as the waves progressed, it became more and more difficult to stop them, especially the Ravagers, which were much quicker and tankier than the rest. This meant that the pillagers would actually have a chance to fight back. But even then, I could just launch them down out of range and cause a bunch of fall damage. I collected a totem from an evoker I killed earlier in the wave, and returned to the top of the pyramid to have a friendly get-together with the remaining pillagers. I did still have things I wanted to accomplish after the raid was over though, so I had to kill them off eventually. The next wave, I managed to pick off the evoker before he could get to me. And even though the rest tried fighting back, there wasn't much they could do. The raid continued into the night, and this time, with 2 Ravagers in one wave, there wasn't really anything I could do to stop them from getting to the top. But after some ring around the rosy, I was able to take them out, and began raining arrows down onto the stragglers. The only mobs I was actually worried about were the evokers, and up to this point, I hadn't allowed any Vexes to be summoned. Although, to be fair, getting hit by a poison potion would also be bad news. But the witches seemed to be more focused on healing than attacking. With that wave eliminated, I was on to the next. This time, I didn't notice one of the Ravagers was sneaking up the side of the pyramid until it was too late, and he had an evoker with him. An evoker that waved its arms around a whole lot, but didn't really do anything. The next ones weren't quite as useless though, and I got my first taste of fighting Vexes. But the Vexes also seemed to struggle a bit with pathfinding, so this wave was mostly just the same as the previous one. And with a couple more arrows to the final mob, I was officially Hero of the Pyramid, Holder of the Totems, and Protector of Popcorn. So, day 99 I flew back to my old base, which is technically still my main base though, since I still have all my items here. I grabbed some bone meal to farm seeds. My goal of repopulating the once extinct chickens was still alive, but I was going to need to have some seeds ready at all times since I didn't have another name tag. And really, I didn't have much time left at this point. So I decided to do some exploring, mainly of desert temples, since they're one of the few structures in a desert-only world and I had only looted one so far. This one really didn't have anything exciting, and neither did the ruined portal that I found next. I was mainly looking for an enchanted golden apple since that was really the only thing I didn't have yet. But those are really rare when you don't have ancient cities, so I wasn't actually expecting to find one. But in the next temple... Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. I didn't find one, but I did find 2 normal ones, and then, as if the game was teasing me, I got another 2 normals in the same chest, and then another in the next temple. I checked a couple more ruined portals, but those also had nothing, so I returned home and started a new project. Operation Wingman. I needed to get Popcorn a mate, and the only way I could do that was by flying around and forcing mobs to constantly spawn and despawn. With the chicken jockey only having a 0.25% chance to spawn, which is 1 out of 400 by the way, I needed to cycle through as many mobs as possible. But the sunrise came sooner than expected, and with it, the mobs vanished. At least I got this cool view to start off day 100 though. Since I couldn't do anything to get a chicken during the day, I instead worked on bringing some rabbits into the pyramid. And for how fast these guys run when you don't have food for them, you'd think they'd be able to pick up the pace a bit. And I'm sorry about the brightness here. My night vision potion still hadn't worn off yet. I tried to introduce Popcorn to some animals that were his size, but he didn't seem very interested in making new friends. And that was pretty much it for my final day, other than watching the sunset over the pyramid and of course saying goodbye to Popcorn. But something tells me that this won't be the last time we see him.